Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to The Flow, where we talk about everything AI, agents, and MCP. I am one of your hosts, Developer Relations Engineer David Jones-Gilardi. And today, as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Carter Rabassa. Hello, Carter.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Carter Rabassa here. I work with David on the Langflow team. I'm his co-host for The Flow. I'm located here in Seattle, Washington. David, where do you hail from?
Oh, I'm in Orlando, Florida, the place where everybody
Fantastic.
comes to take their vacations. Whether they want to be in the sun or not, it just happens,
That's right. So we got a good East Coast, West Coast hosting crew, and we're super excited to have you joining us. For folks that are new to The Flow, this is a podcast and a live stream for developers about building with AI. So what you won't see are any sort of rumors about upcoming GPT models. No sort of hype about whether AGI is coming for us or not. We will not be discussing rumors of acquisitions that have gone well or gone sour for employees. This is really a conversation about like with code and for builders.
Carter, I gotta interject. So I was thinking that maybe for this episode today, instead of Dominik going over all this cool stuff from OpenAI, we talk about all the Star Wars stuff he has behind him, just the whole episode. Right.
By the way, it's not a bad idea. We're not look, we're here to have fun, right? Here to have fun, and Star Wars is definitely a fascinating topic of conversation. So I'll tell you what, let's see how much time we have at the end, and maybe we can do that. But David alluded to our wonderful guest for today's episode, Dom Kundel. He's a developer experience engineer at OpenAI. Wonderful guy, someone I've known for years, and we're just really super happy to have him join us. So Dom, we're gonna kind of kick it over to you. The first question that we just ask everyone who joins us is, when is the first time that you actually wrote a program, and like what were the circumstances and how did that happen?
Yeah, good question. First of all, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. The first time I wrote code, I think like there's sort of like moments where I think I wasn't realizing I was writing code, and then like in hindsight, I'm like, oh right, I wrote code. Like nothing was meaningful, but like I remember like playing with like Visual Basic just because I found it on the computer. And I was like, oh look, if I like type this thing in, and like I can actually show a prompt or stuff. But like I never like considered that coding, or was like, oh, I'm becoming a programmer. I actually transitioned much more gradually, I think, into programming from like using a lot of like front page and Dreamweaver to turn sort of like designs that I created into like websites. So that's really where I first started. And then like, as more and more like JavaScript became more powerful, people were like, oh, look, all of these cool things you can do with web development. And that's really where I got into coding increasingly.
Dude, that's so cool. And I kind of wonder if like young people today are going to have that experience from like kind of like a vibe code perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because there's all kinds of like annoying debates about like, is prompting the same thing as coding and so on and so forth. And like the truth is, like, I mean, there is no truth, right? But like there's like, it's just a spectrum, right? There's probably situations where like a really shallow prompt and a blind copy paste probably isn't programming. But then there's a spectrum where like, there's refinement, there's iterative cycles, and that feels more and more like what coding is, right? I mean, I know from my perspective, like I've never one-shotted a program, right? It's like you write some stuff and then before interpreted languages, like you compiled it and then you ran it, and it never worked. Like it's impossible, but that's okay. Cause like it would sort of, that's what coding was. Like you'd spend hours or days iterating to like function, right? And that's what it meant to be a programmer.
I think also with like, especially with web development, which I think is where most people vibe code, you know, you're not going to like vibe code, like optimized C code on some hardware, but like,
that's an interesting challenge there, Dom.
I did vibe code a lot of Rust recently, but like,
Nice.
I think the big thing was like with web development, we've increasingly gotten to a point where like you can build more complex things in web apps,
Yeah.
but as part of that, I think we've become more elitist on like what is a web app. If you think about like the reason why I love like Front Page and like Dreamweaver and all of these things, like even heck, like how many websites back in the day were like sliced Photoshop images? Where like for the folks who don't know what I'm talking about, like you're able to like load up a picture in Photoshop and then just like cut it into pieces and then export it as a website.
Yeah.
And basically what like Photoshop would do is just like assemble a bunch of tables with all of your pictures.
Yeah.
And that was your
Wow.
website. And that was how you then had like a responsive, that wasn't even a word, I think, back then, like website. But like that was like there were businesses who had that, right? And today,
Absolutely.
you know, you can build these incredible things with vibe coding, and people are like, "That's not really coding." Like maybe don't vibe code like an auth layer, but like, you know, I think for like it's cool that anyone can create like a portfolio website now, for example, to show what they're working on.
No, for sure. So I got to meet Dom for the first time when we both worked together at Twilio. But Dom, you actually joined OpenAI semi recently, maybe in the last few months, working on like really amazing things. Before we dive into sort of today's topic and all of the demos and code that we want to show off, I'm kind of curious, like when we do this podcast with maybe companies that are just sort of like not as famous as OpenAI, we always want to give people the opportunity to introduce themselves, introduce their startup, and help developers understand what kind of problems they're trying to solve, right? On the face of it, that would seem like a silly thing to do with OpenAI, which is like just, you know, it's like arguably the most famous company in the world. But I think the truth is like there's actually like a really, really large and rich platform under the hood and behind the scenes. And there's probably a lot of things that people aren't aware of. So I guess like just what would you like to share about some of the problems that OpenAI is trying to solve, or just like some of the tools that they have for developers that maybe people don't appreciate or aren't as aware of as they should be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think overall, like this is a super hyped up term, but like, you know, everyone's talking about agents. I think that's one of the biggest focus areas for us. But there's a lot of things that people are not necessarily aware of or like haven't tried within our platform that really help you build great agents. I think one of the things that I think is super underestimated, and like we've done a lot of improvements on it recently, is our real-time API. So like the main thing with real-time API with the real-time APIs, it's an API to build voice agents specifically. And to do that, it actually uses speech-to-speech model. So if you talk today to a voice agent, there's normally two types of architectures. There's either what I would consider like a chained architecture, where you take a model that is good at turning voice into text.
Right.
Then you use a traditional LLM that can do text to text, and then you like slap a text to speech model on it and you chain these together.
Right.
But because with this thing, you have a bit of flexibility, like you combine different providers. But one of the things with voice agents specifically is like latency is super crucial.
Yeah.
Right. Like for a conversation to feel natural, you need interruption handling. Like you need to know where in a sentence did you get interrupted. And then also you need to get it down to like 500 milliseconds to like feel anywhere remotely natural. And so the speech-to-speech model is different because it actually takes audio in and outputs audio, which means it can also pick up on things like how you're pronouncing things or the emotions in a voice, right? Like it's gonna be able to pick up on the fact whether I'm yelling a sentence or whether I'm like calmly telling it, and vice versa. Like you can actually steer the prompt to have the model react differently because it's outputting audio directly. You can tell it to like speak more slowly, more calmly, or like sound like a bored, annoyed teenager. And so like there's a lot of these things that you can play with. And like if you want to play with that, like highly recommend checking out in the OpenAI dashboard. There is a real-time playground. Check that out. We have like prompt examples in there. There is a bored teenager one. Highly recommend that one. Is absolutely hilarious to engage with.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I think and we had a really great conversation with someone from Twilio on a previous episode. This is probably something you worked on, but they sort of dove into the conversational relay API, right? Which is, like a very like reasonable way to bridge these digital capabilities to different channels, like including voice. No, that's awesome. I think that is, I do think about that a lot, right? As a developer, I think about like, what do I need and what do developers need from an API or SDK perspective to unlock the capabilities of LLMs for use cases that like real people, want to have, like, for end users. And I think the real time thing is fascinating. I know there's like all sorts of other things that you're working on, and frankly that like other companies are working on too, right? It's like the diverse set of the use cases are so diverse that it really seems like there just isn't sort of like one API to solve every possible problem, right?
No, and I think things are constantly changing. Like everyone collectively is figuring these things out, right? Like, and it's really interesting to just like, I would encourage people to try as many things as possible and like not be sort of like stuck in like, oh, I need to go this way. Like I think, and like, for a lot of people, a combination of different things is going to be the thing that works the best right now. Like, and I think like in terms of one of the things that people don't know about OpenAI is like we have the Agents SDK, for example, both in Python and TypeScript, and it actually works with any model. Like you do not have to use like an OpenAI model to combine it. Like we're really sort of like, we published it as a way of patterns and components that we found useful working with our customers on agents. And it comes with like nice platform features like tracing. You can even trace like non-OpenAI models in the OpenAI platform. So you can like, if you're combining things, you can kind of see how they work together and what tool calls were called and what MCP server, I see your t-shirt, like was used for generating a response. So like, I think, things are still like people are still figuring things out, and like we're going to try to provide the best tools we have, but we can give people to solve these things. But people are going to combine things the way that they work for their use cases.
No, it's cool. It reminds me. It reminds me of a lot of stuff that happened when AWS was first evolving. Like they came out of the gate with basically like EC2 and S3 more or less, and then but like the needs of developers like were significantly like broader than like of virtual server and some storage, right? But there were some like fundamental building blocks that they were trying to figure out. How can we kind of use this infrastructure to like serve more of these needs? We saw it at Twilio, right? You kind of start out with voice and SMS, but underneath those like products, right, there's a lot of infrastructure. And then you think about like, how can we serve developers better, right? What are the things that they continue to stumble with? And how can we, as good product people, sort of identify really broad enough sets of use cases where we're like building a product or a solution like makes a ton of sense. Okay, so I think this is this is a fantastic transition point, frankly, to the conversation for today, or at least part of the conversation, which is the open sourcing of GPT. I'll just be honest, like I'm like, either I'm just not the most plugged in guy, or I'm not that smart. But I just didn't see something like this coming. In part of it because I actually like sort of understand and respect why non-open source services exist, right? Like Twilio is not open source, like Stripe is not open source, right? Like I sort of understand. I felt that I understood sort of how companies think about providing services and then having sort of a business relationship with the companies that use those services, and where you can make guarantees about, and then open source, right? Things like we're all familiar with, right? Like Next.js. Or React, right? I kind of felt like I had a mental model that like sort of put these things in these like discrete buckets. But in fairness, open source like models, LLMs, open source models, they predate proprietary ones, right? So they've been around forever. And then some companies came online. OpenAI and others, that sort of created their own models and put them behind APIs. And I guess in my mind, I just thought that would just sort of be the way things were, forever, right? Because OpenAI has been iterating on their products like at an absurd pace, to the point where people tease you guys about how you name these things, like just like all these hilarious names, and then like the user experience of like the drop down with like all these things, like we don't, but it's just, I mean, what are you going to do, right? I mean, it's you want to, I understand why that happens, because you want to move fast and you want to give people more capabilities, but you want to do it in a way that is like backwards compatible. So if people like have built things or have used things for older models and are happy with it, like they still have it. So anyway, I was caught super off guard. So, but in a way that makes me incredibly happy, right? Because it's obvious that open source, at least this particular project, and like open sourcing the stuff is going to be fantastic for developers on so many different dimensions. So yeah, like before we sort of dive into all the demos in the code, like can you share any insight on like how and why this happened, or like
I was actually curious about that itself. I was surprised as well, right, that OpenAI released an OSS model. So yeah, I'd love to hear this.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the first thing is like it's not our first open model, right? Like it transparently has been the first open model in a while. But like I think GPT-2 is probably one of the biggest like known quantities in this that was an open model. We also have Whisper 3, like we talked about the speech to text model. Like Whisper 3 is still one of the most popular. Both of those are still incredibly popular on Hugging Face, which is sort of for those who are not too deep in this, like it's like GitHub for models. Is like the easiest way to describe it.
I like that.
But like it's not the first model, and I think like to a degree this was like we had planned to have another open model for a while, but like things are happening so fast, like making sure that like it fits in the prioritization, and like we've heard from the community that they wanted another open model from OpenAI, and so like we wanted to get it right though, and like also listen to the community. So like one of the things we've done over the last couple of months as we were developing these models is we actually had these developer listening sessions with people in the US, in APJ and in EMEA, and sort of like talk to developers. We had like 40, 50 developers every time in the room, including like Sam and some of the leadership on the models. And we just listened to them and like talk with them about like, what do you want to get out of a model? Why do you use open models? And like the reality is like a lot of people use a combination. They don't go like all the way for open models, all the way for like proprietary hosted models. There is use cases where you just can't use a hosted model, for example, where like,
that's right,
especially for more like specific data sensitive things, security
you
aspects.
hear that a lot.
Like,
yes. Yeah. We talked to a lot of
well, I mean, David and I David and I are recently, as of like 2 weeks ago, IBM employees, because we work on the Langflow team, which was owned by a company called DataStax, and DataStax got acquired by IBM. But when you're getting exposed to enterprise kind of grade conversations, this is like these are like hard requirements. Like we have to. It matters where the data lives. It matters where it's processed. They're not always like business decisions. Like sometimes there's like EU sovereignty, like guidelines that you have to deal with. And at the end of the day, like and I think with the listening sessions, like these are developers. These business requirements get pushed down on devs, right? And then ultimately the developer is the one that has to like solve the problem, where it's like, well, we have to have the best possible end user experience, like, and we have to meet these requirements, right? And then they kind of come to OpenAI saying like, hey, like, we want to use these models, but we can't the way they're set up right now. Okay, this is the perfect transition point, because once again, this remember the whole premise of the podcast is conversations and code, and it's I know everyone at home is kind of like, when will we see code? But I think this is a great setup for it, because like now we're gonna dive into some fun demos, and Dom's gonna show us like, hey, what can you do with this stuff? So let's kick it off.
Yeah, I'm just gonna share my screen. I think one of the things, because I don't think everyone like lives on, online trying to follow up with like all of the latest releases. So like we talked about the fact that we released an open model. We actually released two, and I think that's very important to keep in mind, because both of these models are incredibly small for their capabilities. And one of the things we heard in like developer feedbacks is like they really didn't want us to hold back, and I don't think we did, because I'm trying not to show you a bunch of graphs and stuff, but like I do think like two things to like put this in context is if we're looking at any of these graphs, like this is a math competition, like both of these models are performing like in line with some of our like, not GPT-5 that just got launched, but this got launched like 2 days before. So they're not on these graphs, but like they are competing not necessarily just in the like open model realm, but they're actually competing it like with like the other models that we have in terms of some of these capabilities. And this is really important, I think, if you're going back to like, people use a combination. And I think one of the things that is exciting about these things is they behave very similarly. And we're going to see that in the demos. They're going to behave very similarly to like what you might be used to from like O4 Mini and O3 Mini in terms of the capabilities it has. The other thing I just want to throw in is, like I said, for their size, this 20B model, which is like the smaller one, can actually run on any laptop or anything that has like 16 gigabytes of like VRAM or RAM, depending on how fast you want to run it. And the 120B can run on like a single GPU, like server GPU, like an 80 gigabyte, but it can also run on some really high-end MacBooks. In fact, this is where we go into the first demo. I have LM Studio here. Like there's two common software pieces that exist to like run these locally with like a not very like you have to write a bunch of CLI commands, but like in a more like end user friendly way. One of them is LM Studio. So I actually downloaded the 120B model. It's around like 60 gigs. And I have a 128 gigabyte MacBook Pro. I know that not everyone has that.
Can you send some of those to us? I would love one of those.
I think even some of my colleagues want mine, but it's still exciting, like to have this model that, like, if we look at the benchmarks, can actually run fully locally. And I can't turn the internet off because then we lose each other. But like, you can trust me, hopefully, that like this is running locally.
Sure.
In fact, like,
actually, I hadn't. David, have you played around with LM Studio yet? Or LLM
no,
Studio?
this is new to me. I'm, when I do local models, I usually use Llama. So
we're gonna use Llama as well.
Okay, cool. But this is not familiar with LLM Studio.
No, not at all.
Definitely, we'll add a link to it in the show notes.
I just want to point out that Dom is rubbing in that he in fact does really have all that RAM that he claimed he had.
Yes. I do. But also like to like showcase here, like the model is already like loaded. So if I write hey, you can see it's actually running. It ran at like 70 tokens a second. So that's incredibly fast. Like it's not like churning out a few tokens here. Wow. But one of the first things I wanted to show is part of this model is actually it has the full access to the raw chain of thought. Meaning you can actually access the full context of like how the model is thinking through a problem. If we do the classic like how many, I'm going to do a slightly different one because everyone, I think, believes now. How many bees are in blueberry?
Nice.
You can see it's like working through the problem here and things through it. and like gives us the answer. And we can actually control, do we want like low, medium, or high reasoning?
Nice.
And like that is like super important, because one of the things we heard from the community is like reasoning models are great, but sometimes latency matters, right?
Yep. Oh, for sure.
And so low is essentially as close as you can get to getting the best of both worlds, where, you know, if we're saying something like, give me an SVG of a pelican on a bike. If you hang out too much on Twitter like I do, you might know the reference here. But you see that it actually like thought in one sentence and then straight up jumped in, right? So we try to, you know, really make sure that the small, like the short, low reasoning is actually as close to like not reasoning as possible.
Dom, just to pause you, like and this is because I'm not familiar with LLM Studio. Like, is this client app's ability to access the chain of thought a result of the fact that this model is Responses API compatible? Like, is that how it's getting this metadata back, or?
No, so we'll dive a bit into it in a second, but like essentially, like there's a couple of layers to this. It's a super good question, where you have, on the one hand, you know, the model needs to output the chain of thought in a way where you can access it,
right?
And then in this case, LM Studio can tap directly into that, but you could build your own client where you're accessing it because the API is built either as a responses API, or like some people have bolted on to chat completions, a way to access the raw chain of thought there. And we have a recommendation on how to do that ourselves, even though it's not in our public spec, because it's actually very important. It gets to one of the features I haven't talked about yet. Like one of the big things that this model does that no other open model does, but that you might be familiar with from like O3 or O4 Mini, is it can actually perform tool calling as part of the chain of thought. So it doesn't have to like finish a conversation, like give the user a message and then do another function call. It can actually use different tools to work through sort of the thought, like through solving a problem. In fact, we can jump to a different demo here, and this one uses Ollama behind the scenes. But I'm using their API to kind of rig up a bit of my own like demo playground here that shows a couple of functionalities. So you can just use the Ollama app, but like the interesting thing is, as I said, we can do tool calling as part of the chain of thought. So if I create a get weather like function here, and I ask something like, it's the weather in Orlando and Seattle.
Yeah, thanks.
So it's starting to like give me the raw chain of thought here, and it's realizing, okay, I need to do two calls here. I need to figure out the weather for Orlando and Seattle. And this is running the smaller 20B model now, just to have a bit of context.
I love that.
But in here, I can say, okay, like it's sunny. And then it realizes, okay, now I need to also check Seattle. So it's trying to do another call. I think I have messed up the UI here, so it didn't render the second tool call. But you can see that it actually, before it's trying to get to a result, walk through sort of, do I have everything I need? Where that really becomes evident is we trained the model on two tools specifically. And again, if you're used to ChatGPT or our hosted models, these seem familiar. We actually trained the model on both browsing capabilities and Python code interpreter capabilities natively. So what that means in practice is you can hook up any browsing engine you want. In this case, I'm using the Exa API, and I just built like a little demo app that all of this is online on GitHub. You can download it, run it yourself. We'll provide the links. But what we can do here is, if we start a new chat here, I can turn on the browser search, and I'll crank this up so we have enough time. But what I'll do is I'm going to ask, like, what is the latest model from OpenAI? And it's going to start cranking on this. And you can see on the right side here, I just have like a bit of like a debug view, so we can, like, you don't necessarily have to follow everything here, but you will see in a second it's going to spit out like a bunch of text here. And that's actually how the browsing works. It's using text. It's not doing computer use or anything. But you can see on the left side here, the chain of thought, right? So it's like realizing it needs to search the web because it like has a knowledge cutoff. So it's going to search for like latest model. It realizes, okay, there is actually one, but we trained it to provide citations. So it needs more data. So it's not going to just like, I looked on Google or whatever search engine you're using and like jump to a conclusion. It actually opens up a page and starts going through the page, trying to understand. It's scrolling through the page because we only provide a couple of lines here. You can see it on the right side. This is only lines 35, like 34 to 45.
Sorry, just pause you again. Like, what's the mental model of what's happening? I mean, like is this kind of like a puppeteerish thing where there's like the page is being rendered and there's like a viewport and like, is that what's happening?
It's sort of the same mental model. It's much more simple. So what we basically do is we fetch the full HTML. We turn it into, but you have full control over this. You can build your own version. But like this very basic one is it turns the whole text into just like lines and then gives the model these line indicators. So the viewport is basically like a couple of lines in the text so that we're not bombarding it with the full HTML. And then we give the model 3 tools. We give the model the tool to search, the model the ability to pull up a single page, or to look at particular parts of a page and find things in the page. The same way that like you would navigate, just fully on text.
Totally. But now, is this tool that you're describing? I thought you said it was something called exit. Is this tool built in? Okay, so is this built into the model or is this external from the model?
So there is the model got trained on the type of tool, but not the implementation of the tool. Right. So you can bring your own implementation of that search tool. So
is that what you're doing here? Like, have you wired? Exactly. Like, you built this app, right? So like, have you wired this app up to some external tool?
Correct. So if I pull this up, basically like we have this little Exa backend here.
Nice.
And so what we
exit. Okay. So it's a service. Like I can go sign up for an exit.ai account and I can use that as a tool for what I'm building.
Correct. And so basically we just like, we have a couple of helpers that like already turn like HTML into this like line indicator format that the model really likes working with. And so like what I'm doing here is I just make an API call to the search API. And then I pull this in. And similarly, like for fetching an individual page, I just like grab the HTML and then like process that for the individual page.
Nice.
But you can see here, it did all of this as part of the chain of thought, right? At no point in time did it actually respond to the user before finally having all the information. And then it gives you the resources here and like citations so that you can get the context of this. I think one of the things that I wanted to show as part of this that I think is super interesting from a developer perspective, I always like trying to understand how these things work, right? And one of the things that, I worked with like OpenAI APIs before joining OpenAI, I used like a bunch of LLMs, like understanding how function calling works behind the scenes, understanding how these things work, like it's very much a black box with a lot of the like proprietary models, right? Like you just give it a JSON. In this case, like when like maybe a function definition like this. I pull this. Like this is what probably most people who've ever used function calling like are used to, right? Like, I give it a get weather tool and like a description and then this, but like what happens behind the scenes? Because an LLM, one, it doesn't take text in. It's a common misconception. It takes numbers in. It takes token IDs in.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it generates a new token. But how do we go from there to all of these advanced features that people have started doing? Because if you've used GPT-2, GPT-3, or any of those like older ones, like they weren't chat models, or sometimes you hear them called instruct models. they were just completion models. They would you would give them a sentence and they would continue to finish the sentence until you stop them from continuing the sentence. But now these models are chat models, and they actually were post-trained. So they took these completion models and they post-trained them on a certain format so that they always behave in a specific way.
Right.
The most basic way of this you can imagine is if we go, let's pull up. Where's tokenizer? There we go. The most common thing that people might be familiar with is sort of oh, come on, why aren't you loading? I think I have a bad cache. There we go. The most basic one that people can imagine is what is the weather? And then you write assistant. This is sort of if you look at LLM 101, this is what they often give as an example. And then that converts into these tokens, which then convert into token IDs, which are numbers. And there is a bunch of formats, if you look at different open models especially, that use so-called special tokens to format things in a specific way. So for example, if you want to give system instructions, I think in Llama, it's something like sys or ins, I think, some weird syntax like this, and then some information, and then and that's how they start formatting these things in for older OpenAI models, or if you look at Azure, you will find things called ChatML. Those are really basically all of the markup languages essentially that turn structure a prompt in a way that the model then knows how to behave. The OpenAI one we released as part of this is called Harmony. And basically it's a way to structure the prompt in that's how the model got trained, but that's how the model structures, for example, how the chain of thought is accessible, how it does tool calling, etc. So I actually, when I ran this this browsing example, oh no, I think I didn't turn debug on. Let's start a new one here and just write hey, just start out with something simple.
You're sliding into my DMs, dude.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And so you can see here,
nice.
This is actually the token format that got pushed in, but I built this little app that makes it a bit easier for us to understand. Well, what's happening here?
It's
when
still
things
very
are real.
much
Work in progress. Oh, it's because it uses a emoji, and I didn't fix that yet. The joy of emojis, I think. Carter,
emojis should be the first thing you do, Dom. Come on.
Carter, you have some vivid memories of this, I think.
Yeah, man. I mean, emojis, yeah, they're hard, but they're the most important thing in the world to fix. So.
I know. I just grabbed it out here. But if we push this in here, we see it broken down a bit. So let me explain you what you see. So first on the right side here, that's basically just broken down the prompt that I put in into tokens. And so you can see there's these special tokens here that have these pipes, start, message, then you have some content here, and then an end, and then you have another start. And this is essentially Harmony. What that means in practice is it's a way for us to format messages. And I broke them down and parsed them on the left side here, where you have the first message that is a message to the system. And this is where we define, your ChatGPT, knowledge cutoff, current date, and then the reasoning level. So if we set this to high, the model actually knows it should reason on high as opposed to low.
Right.
If you omit this, it's just going to assume you want medium. And then we tell it that there's valid channels called analysis, commentary, and final. And this is for the model how we deal with chain of thought. So whenever it writes a message to a analysis channel, it basically says, okay, I'm reasoning here. I'm doing stuff. Leave me alone. And whenever it's done, it can write to the final channel. And the final channel is like what it wants to say to the user.
Cool.
The commentary channel sort of lives in the gray zone where analysis is the thing that you really don't want to show to end users. It's intentionally not safeguarded. It might have like hallucinations. It might have like, you know, inappropriate language, harmful language in it. So it's not something you want to show to the user. Commentary and final are things you can show to the user. And so commentary is used for function calling because normally like a function call you want to show to the user. And so that's when it gets pushed there. It also has this concept of preamble. So occasionally if it's going to do a bunch of stuff, it might tell the user, hey, I'm about to do these 3 tool calls just as a heads up. And so that it might put that into the commentary channel.
Oh, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question for you is for Harmony, right? So is Harmony something that is just underneath the hood that the OpenAI models are using, or is it, as a developer, is it something that I can manipulate, right? Especially in my own prompts and things like that.
So the format itself is the thing you want to stick to as closely as possible. That's what the model got trained on, and that's what the model understands. In fact, if you looked at like, the last couple of weeks, like last week as the model came out, some of the like performances on different like providers were differently good, and that was because there were bugs in the Harmony implementations that they had. Some of them were using our renderer and we had a bug. Some of them used like other ways to construct these formats. And so if you're not adhering to it correctly, it might result in like the model like will very certainly misbehave. And so you want to stick to the format, but outside, like within that format, you have like flexibility, right? So you can modify, for example, the developer message here, which I'll explain in a second, or like, you can decide what things to put in, and you have that flexibility.
But I want to push on this, right? Because as an OpenAI developer today, I've never even heard of Harmony, right?
Correct.
And I use your APIs, right? I use the responses API or the completions API. Like those higher level APIs basically let me not care about this stuff. And I know that the open source GPT like is basically like responses API compatible. So like so kind of going back. So I still don't know what the answer is. Like, is this just like assembly code where like it's kind of interesting and like maybe if you're building like video games, you need to go down to this level, or is it like actually, Carter, like this is really important and like you can totally use like the completions API because it's very convenient. But there's a lot of value for a developer to like actually going down one more level and like learning Harmony. Like I'm sort of not clear on that.
So the response, like you can use like other people's like responses APIs, chat completions APIs, and then you don't have to worry about this because what they basically do is they do these 3 steps, right? Like they take the input from chat completions, they turn it into this messaging format on the left side, and then they run it, like turn it into like Harmony, which goes into these token IDs. So from that perspective, like if you don't want to care, you don't have to care. There's 2 reasons why you might want to care. One is if you actually do your own inference. So like if you're running, for example, like the browser tool and the Python tool, if you are using like another person's API, you're basically relying on them to implement browsing in Python as like whatever they want. So it's the equivalent of like if you're using code interpreter or browsing on the OpenAI APIs, you're sort of like dealing with whatever whatever we chose as a provider. Same way if you're using Grok, for example, Grok with a Q, they have in their responses API a code interpreter and search provider, like browsing provider, but you're basically like relying on whatever they chose as those providers. So there's some win, some lose, but like if you actually like go and grab a GPU off like Lambda Labs or Modal or something, and you use inference code itself. So for example, VLLM is a common one. then you have the ability to actually like do all of this processing yourself and decide like what your Python tool should be, what your what your search provider should be and stuff. And so it really depends on what control you want. The other thing that I personally like is if we do another quick example here, if I go back and I turn on that function definition here, right? Like the get weather, and I say weather in Seattle, and then once it starts generating this, there we go. It always has to like load it back into memory, and we just grab this. Streamlit, come on. There we go. I think I clicked it.
I love how it goes away when you hover over it.
That's too funny, dude.
That's great.
Well, there's that deploy button is like in the way or something.
There we go. I think I copied it now.
That's fun.
It's too funny.
So if we put this in, Carter, I know you're a web dev. You can actually see here, it turned this into TypeScript definitions.
Oh, wow.
So it turned the JSON schema into TypeScript definitions because that's what the model got trained on to define functions.
Interesting.
And so for me, like I've worked on like agents before. There were like native function calling and stuff where we would do like React tool calling,
right?
Which is like React as in a prompting style, like. And like I would play around with like TypeScript definitions, and like it makes sense now for me to like see this and be like, okay, like this model got trained on like TypeScript definitions. So like if I'm writing JSON schema, I know that like the description is going to actually become a comment on this like property and stuff. And so I might actually start thinking about like, how do I want to do my prompt engineering? Because I know much closer to like what the model is actually going to receive. In a similar way, this is the system prompt, right? That like we defined, which is called put under instructions. It has like a one like markdown like H1 here. So like if you think that like your stuff is going to be put in here, and you're using markdown, like maybe you're confusing the model, right? Like what if I create in my system prompt here, like
right. You use markdown there, right?
Tools. We're gonna have two tools, and it's gonna start messing with things. And so like from that perspective, I do think it's helpful to understand this because you're much closer to like what is being put into the model. And then similarly, like, you see there's the tool call here. I think I didn't copy the tool call. But basically, like, I think from that lens, it makes sense to be aware of this. One of the things that is a confusion that I do want to call out is we've looked at these syntax here, right? And so one of the things I don't want you to take away from this is like, oh, I can write
start, whatever,
channel, blah, blah, blah. And like mess around with it that way.
Right.
Theoretically, some inference providers might actually let you do that. And it's, I would say, unintentional. Because what basically happens is that like you... these should actually be encoded differently, and not as a special token. So let me show you a very quick example and why this matters. If I just create a user message here,
I mean, you're kind of like, I don't know, this reminds me of like when people would like monkey patch JavaScript, like native JavaScript functions or something,
It's the way I would think about it is like, it's HTML escaping, right? So you can see here, I have all of these special tokens, but if I write into the user message here, channel, if it's correctly implemented, you can see this channel here is actually differently encoded than if I would like add a channel on the other side. Now I messed this up, but like you get the point. There we go. You can see it's actually not broken into a single token.
Right.
And that's the correct behavior. But
that's
these
crazy.
tokens here, like the model does not know about this syntax. Like we named these things. And to prove a point, like if we see these numbers here, right, or let's take this text here, and I go in here, and what I did is, for those who are more on the web dev side, this is just a Python notebook that I've installed the Harmony library, as well as TickToken, which is a common other tokenizer that like from OpenAI that you would normally use. And we'll put in this same message here. We can see these tokens are here, 200,006, 1428, and these are the so-called special tokens.
Right.
The thing that makes these completely arbitrary, or like to prove you that, is I imported TickToken here, and I'm going to create my own Langflow encoding here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, actually, okay, there is a special token called Carter. And that is 200,006. And then we have one, and I'm using arbitrary syntax here, right? I'm going to call this one David.
Yeah.
And this one is 200,007, and then I'm going to create another one with 2 brackets called Dom, 200,008.
Okay.
And now I'm taking these numbers here, right? And I'm going to run this again. And now it's encoded like this. And I think I messed up my I think it doesn't like these. Why did I miss out the numbers? No, that should be fine. That encoding is a bit, there we go. Fragile, but like you can see here, like I can make up things, right? Like we just named them that way because it makes it incredibly reasonable. But like that's a thing that like I started seeing as we released Harmony. People were like, oh, I can like put in random like channel or other things. Like you don't need those if you're just using the responses API chat completions and stuff. So like you shouldn't have to worry about them. If you can put those in, it's probably a wrong implementation on the inference provider side. Like if you can mess with the behavior by putting in like channel tags or other things, it's not because the model got magically trained on this syntax, which is the misconception we see, but it's actually like wrongly implemented handling of special tokens.
So, man, sorry, like this we could spend like another hour on this probably. Like, for in what are the situations where a developer who previously, was happily using OpenAI services, but is super excited about what's been open source? Like, what are the specific situations where like they would want to learn like more about Harmony and the format in order to improve like their applications?
I would say if you are really trying to like get the most out of your like the model as you're prompting it, like that's a good opportunity for you to like look into Harmony. Sort of the way I think about it is like, you know how if you're using like Langflow, I think is open source, right? Like,
Sure, yeah.
Maybe you're running into issues where you're like, oh, this is like, I wonder if I can do this thing, or I'll like, how do I get the most out of that? Like, that's the moment when you start looking into Harmony, in the same way, right? So if you're like just happy with like hosted Langflow in the cloud, like you're probably not going to start digging through the code. But if you're self-hosting Langflow, you might be like, okay, like how do I like get to this like, advanced feature? I think in a similar way, like if you start thinking about like, how do I get the most out of browser search? How do I get the most out of code interpreter? And those things, like that's when you want to start looking into Harmony.
With that, would your recommendation then be something like, hey, if you're using one of these OpenAI models and it's doing the things that you need to be doing in your application, and you don't really need to go any deeper, then you probably don't need to worry about Harmony. But the second you start to deviate away, right, it's from like the core capabilities and stuff, maybe you need to do something a little bit more advanced or whatever, now you need to go that level deeper.
And I think like the other thing is like we are building as like the developer community, right? Like we're increasingly relying on these things that like we don't understand. And so like personally, like I just love understanding these things more. So like that's the other way I would think about it. Like you probably don't need to understand Harmony if you're running like an agent in production by just using like a hosted provider. Like you don't have to care about Harmony at all. That's what you pay them for in some way or another. But like if you are a tinkerer who wants to run stuff locally, if you want to just understand better how the thing works, right? Like I think a lot of people start like, let me correct this. One of the common ways that, you know, we talk about Strawberry, like this whole like joke about
babies,
like how many R's are in Strawberry and stuff. Like the reason why it struggles with that is tokenization, right? Like if you have a non-reasoning model, like Strawberry gets broken up like this, not by characters.
Right.
So in a similar way, like some of these behaviors can just be better understood by understanding what are the steps that are happening as you're processing this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that makes perfect sense. I was sort of like digging in because at the same time, like you were sort of simultaneously like showing this really cool stuff with Harmony, but then you were kind of warning people like, oh, but don't use it for this and don't use it for that. So I think like I think when you work, maybe when you work at OpenAI, or you work on these things, like however many hours a week you work on them, you get really smart about like the specificity of like, and I think like for kind of developers that are outside of the ecosystem, it's more of there's more of a learning curve. For sort of having heuristics about like, when should I dive into that and when should I bother to learn this? And that's kind of why I was probing.
No,
but
absolutely.
I totally agree with you. Like, I think, like as we, like holistically, like we are, we're running into a place where most developers have an insufficient understanding of how stuff works. And that's generally bad, right? That's how pre-AI, like this is how back in the cloud era, you would run into horrific security incidents, because developers were just like kind of like YOLOing a bunch of cloud and security and like data stuff. And now there's like we have our own AI version of these things where developers are they don't often, and I, by the way, completely include myself, right? This is not like other people. This is like just most of us. So I think the fact that that this exists, that it's increasingly being like open sourced and documented and evangelized, this is really good stuff, right? Because I think that people do treat this stuff like as magic, like it's magic, and it's like, it's not magic. It's like, it's sort of like character completion, but like, times a trillion. But if you kind of work your way down, like these things are like understandable. It's just that the scale at which they operate makes it feel magical. This is awesome.
But yeah, like I think this is the sentence that like we talked about, which like if you are reading the Harmony guide and anything, like if you are using it through an API, like response API chat completions or something like Olama and LM Studio, you don't have to deal with Harmony directly. Like it's really when you jump one step down, the outside of that, like the only thing you need to understand is the like information, like hierarchy. And like, that's the only thing you will immediately run into, right? Is like, the reason why we have all of these roles is because they actually train the model into like, how do you deal with conflicting information? Like if you would say like, now reason hard in the like user message, it's not going to do it because the system message set to do medium.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's like and that's why I think I know I've done this. Like I've run into situations where we all do this, right? Like in our prompts, like we're trying to create our own Harmony-esque formats. But your mileage, babe, it's not like it never works. It actually works a lot, but it doesn't always work. And you're like, what the hell? Like I even created my own tag and I referenced it and stuff. And it's, as a developer, you just kind of like throw your hands up in the air. Like I don't understand. Like I wish I had a more predictable way of dealing with this stuff. But anyway, we've got to wrap things up. This is just an absolutely amazing conversation, Dom. Thanks for joining us. I'm
Thanks
gonna
for
go
having me.
get my. I'm gonna go. I don't know how I'm gonna get my hands on a laptop with 120 gigabytes of RAM, but I'm
The
gonna.
20 gig one, the 20B one should work fine on your
Okay,
laptop.
okay, thank you.
Thanks a
I'll.
lot.
I'm gonna go. I definitely want to check this stuff out. Also need to check out LLM Studio. Because like David, I've just been sort of I just kind of like discovered Olama once upon a time, and it just became a daily driver for me. But
Yeah,
it's always
same.
just it's great to try new things.
Yeah.
Before we go, are there any is there anything you want to kind of share with folks that are watching, like any cool things that OpenAI is working on or things that they should check out?
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually running a hackathon, a virtual hackathon on DevPost for the new open model. So if you
Nice.
want to play around with this, highly recommend checking it out. We have a lot of cool prizes, including great graphics cards that you can throw into your computer to actually run the models.
Nice,
Like an
nice.
RTX 6000 Pro, which is just like a
Oh, really?
$10,000 like
Yeah.
GPU. So
Wow.
like Nvidia kindly hooked us up for that. But yeah, check that out.
Okay.
There's a lot of cool categories, including weirdest hardware you can run it on. Fine tuning. That's the other
Yeah.
case where you need to care about harmony, by the way.
Right.
But yeah, check out the hackathon and let us know what you're building with the model.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we will, and I'm sure folks can probably just Google OpenAI hackathon, but we'll get the link from you and pop it in the show notes so people can check it out. Is when does the hackathon run through? Do you know?
I don't know the exact date. It's roughly 30 days from
Great. Awesome.
today.
Okay,
from
fantastic.
today.
Well, then
Oh,
yeah, that's great. So like, so
nice.
by the time you're hearing this, I'm sure the hackathon will still be going on. So you should definitely check it out. Yeah. Hey, Dom, once again, thanks for joining us. This is these doing these things like are awesome. The conversations are always so fun.
Yeah.
And the only downside is that it just sort of, creates like 2 hours of like stuff that I have to go check out and do, on top of like the actual real jobs that we have. But this stuff was just super awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us, and thanks for coming on the flow.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks,
Hey,
we
everyone.
will see you next time. Take care.